Do the words "no Russian" mean anything to you? Can video games cause people to behave violently? Is Call of Duty a government psyop being funded by American taxpayers, as well as multi-billion-dollar snack conglomerate Frito and Pepsi? These are just a few of the important questions that we're going to be talking about today. In another step to make the countless hours I spent playing Call of Duty as a teenager mean something, today we're going to be talking about several of the conspiracies, as well as the legacy and controversy of the Modern Warfare trilogy. Of course, my retrospective of the original trilogy is over on the main channel, so check that out if you're interested. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. Call of Duty is a massive franchise that has grown beyond simply being a game and is now more of an entity or an idea. But how did it get where it is today? Well, to answer that question, I first want to talk about the branded partnerships that helped it get there. So let's take a walk down memory lane. Over the years, one of the most active brands involved in video game sponsorships has been PepsiCo, who owns popular chip manufacturer Frito-Lay and soda brands like Mountain Dew. In 2005, Mountain Dew introduced Game Fuel, which was a limited time flavor, usually in cherry citrus, that debuted in partnership with the upcoming Xbox 360 platform. The initial promo was a campaign called Every 10 Minutes, where customers would collect codes on the bottle caps of Mountain Dew or PepsiCo products and use the currency from those codes to bid on an as-yet unreleased Xbox 360, which was available every 10 minutes.
I'm a winner.
So like eBay, but with fake money invented by Mountain Dew. Effectively, it is a currency only Mountain Dew made that you can only spend on things Mountain Dew wants you to spend them on. Why does that sound familiar? By 2007, Mountain Dew re-released its Citrus Cherry Game Fuel flavor in stores as a promotion for Halo 3, followed by a new blue flavor for World of Warcraft in 2009. And in 2011, Citrus Cherry made yet another comeback for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. This was the first time Game Fuel bottles came with in-game bonuses, including the now famous double XP codes, where players could earn twice the experience awards for a set amount of time, helping them level up, unlock weapons, and other in-game rewards much faster. This is one of those things that you simply had to be there. I cannot express to you the excitement of you and all of your friends in middle school getting Call of Duty, and then you beg your parents on the way home to stop by the gas station so you could go find the Mountain Dew bottles that gave you the codes to level up quicker. It truly was a magical time. Now no one actually owns anything. It's all subscription services and pay-to-win cycles and season passes, but this is supposed to be a happy video, so I'll stop. Game Fuel returned for other promos over the years, including Call of Duty Advanced Warfare in 2014, Black Ops 3 in 2015, and again in 2021 for Vanguard and Warzone. Doritos ran similar promotions, including in 2014, where in-game gear could be obtained through a reward system, also in-game, that featured supply drops of Doritos-themed cosmetics like weapons and tactical gear. Oh yeah, I forgot about supply drops. That was a whole other headache. But in hindsight, I feel like they weren't as bad as some of the stuff we have now, because with supply drops, you at least get to keep whatever's in there. And it's like a lottery system, so it can be addictive, and that's, not good. But I feel like as long as you could unlock enough stuff to get supply drops in game, they weren't that bad. It was the microtransactions to buy them that I feel like became the problem. Even auto manufacturer Chrysler got in on the action, as Jeep created multiple Call of Duty Edition Wranglers to coincide with Black Ops and Modern Warfare 3 in 2012. About 2,000 of the Black Ops editions were made, and 1,500 of the Modern Warfare 3 editions. Which, I kid you not, there was a guy in the town I grew up who had one of the Modern Warfare 3 Jeeps. And every time I saw it out at Subway, it was the coolest thing ever. But of course, the promotions didn't end at just products, as Call of Duty had some very famous commercials. If you're watching any TV during the late 2000s and 2010s, you likely caught at least some of Activision's ad campaigns for the Call of Duty games. The company dumped hundreds of millions of dollars into promotional materials, including several star-studded commercials featuring celebrities and regular Joes engaged in military combat. When Treyarch did the ad campaign for Black Ops with the "There's a hero in all of us" mantra, they pulled a lot of celebrity performances for their trailer. Robert Downey Jr. piloted an F-22, Kobe Bryant, rest in peace, ran through a battlefield firing a rifle, and Jimmy Kimmel and Jonah Hill fired RPGs as nurses, a hotel concierge, a deli worker, and even a 10-year-old girl all engaged in warfare around them. There's even a commercial where Megan Fox takes down a small drone using a suppressed pistol, and one instance where my friend Kyle, or as you know him, FPS Russia, made an appearance. They knew exactly how to hook their fan base, and it was kind of nice when all the commercials and advertisement would just take me away, and I'd be okay with it. However, I think one thing that Call of Duty did that was so special for the time, and is one of the most memorable things about the entire series to me, is Call of Duty Elite. Riding the momentum of the Modern Warfare and Black Ops franchise's popularity, Activision, now Activision Blizzard, created Call of Duty Elite, which was a short-lived online service available for 2 years between 2011 and 2013. Or as comedian TJ Miller explains in a voiceover for an ad promoting the service, quote, Call of Duty Elite is like if organized sports and social networking had a baby and they gave that baby a flamethrower. Elite offered free features like detailed analysis of multiplayer matchups, including heat maps and advanced player statistics, the ability to share custom weapon loadouts, and even a social networking platform. But it also had a paid premium tier, which came with DLC and granted players access to exclusive competitions where they could win any number of prizes. There was truly nothing like it at the time. These tournaments were really cool, so anyone who had the Elite Premium membership, for one, they also got access to like DLCs and in-game bonuses like custom skins and stuff like that. But they would also have these rolling tournaments. So every week or every other week, there would be a tournament around a specific game mode like Capture the Flag or Domination. And anyone who signed up for the tournament and then just went to Modern Warfare 3, at least when I was playing it was Modern Warfare 3. I think one of the Treyarch entries was involved with Elite as well. But again, Modern Warfare 3 was the main one I remember. After you register, you just go play Modern Warfare 3, play that game mode, and all of your stats would go automatically over to the Elite leaderboard. So then when the timer on the tournament was up, they would deal out prizes based on whoever got the highest scores on the leaderboard. And some of these prizes were really cool. A lot of the time it would be like in-game stuff or maybe a poster or something. But I remember one time, like one of the first tournaments I played, the deal was like you got a skateboard and a helmet and like a little like a tiny half pipe or something like that. And I didn't even skate, but I really wanted the Call of Duty skateboard. And I probably placed like 2,000 or something. I wasn't even close, but it was really cool at the time. I'm also pretty sure some of the Jeeps, or at least some additional Jeeps, were part of the rewards for these Elite tournaments. It was a huge deal, and again, I don't remember anything like that existing around then. It was very innovative for 2011. Now, most memorably to me, or probably unmemorable if you're a normal person, the paid tier of Elite had a video streaming service called Elite TV. It was a streaming service for shows that were entirely related to Call of Duty. The service had a program called Friday Night Fights, which pitted real-life rivals against each other in Call of Duty multiplayer. Army versus Navy, firefighters versus police, even NBA players like Dwight Howard versus John Wall. There's also a digital series called NoobTube, based on the nickname for the grenade launcher throughout the Modern Warfare series. Or, you know, the way losers played Call of Duty. Hosted by Andrew Santino, yes, the comedian from the Bad Friends podcast, NoobTube was a clip-based show very similar to Tosh.0 or Ridiculousness, only with user-submitted clips from Call of Duty matchmaking instead of YouTube videos. Santino would comment and make jokes as the clips played. So here's a fun fact. When I was 12, I really wanted to be on NoobTube, so I made a clip in Modern Warfare 3's theater mode and submitted it to NoobTube, and I didn't know this at the time, but any submissions would get posted to a YouTube channel, I guess. Like they would get backed up there for storage sake. And I never made it onto the show, but that clip is still up on YouTube to this day. Now, it's not a good clip, but I was 12 and desperate, and this was the coolest thing I could do. There was even a series called Cocked Hammers, which starred Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Justin Theroux as friends who get sucked into Call of Duty. The entire series takes place in-game with avatars who resemble the cast as they wreak havoc on the digital world around them. So yes, Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, Justin Theroux, some massive stars. You have like half the cast of Arrested Development just for this Call of Duty streaming service. And they're still up on YouTube. You can go watch them. They only ever made 2 episodes to my knowledge. And they are so cheesy and such a relic of the time. It is fantastic. All of this to say that Call of Duty was, and still is, a massive, culturally significant franchise that benefited from an absolute boatload of money being poured into it. Again, if you're younger or didn't play Call of Duty in its heyday, it may be confusing why a series that is as divisive as it is now is as popular as it is. But just going off of how huge the series was back then, it makes sense as to why it's continued for so long. But all of that cultural significance doesn't come without some backlash, because while the COD franchise has become a hallmark of modern society, it has also faced its share of criticism. Given the history of video game controversies, usually with violence as the centerpiece, this isn't terribly surprising. After all, video games have been accused of being unnecessarily violent since as early as 1976. The game Death Race, a coin-operated arcade game found in amusement parks, had players controlling a car to run over gremlins, which basically just look like human stick figures. The game attracted the outrage of the National Safety Council, with some demanding it to be removed from parks. But I'm sure as many of you know, the most famous video game controversy came in 1992 with Mortal Kombat. With graphic, photorealistic for the time, player-controlled characters ripping out each other's backbones, snatching body parts out of faces, and so forth, the furrow over Mortal Kombat's fatalities was intense. The outrage even led to Senate hearings led by Joe Lieberman and Herb Kohl, who discussed games like Mortal Kombat and what they viewed as potentially damaging effects on children and adolescents. The release of more controversial titles like Wolfenstein and Doom, which were some of the earliest first-person shooters, fully put the player in the perspective of the character on screen, making the violence feel more immersive and personal than ever before. I know what you're seeing on screen is incredibly tame compared to what we have now, but this was a big deal at the time. The outcry from these games became so extreme that the games industry decided to regulate itself by implementing the ESRB, or Entertainment Software Rating Board. The ESRB, or ESRB as I called it as a kid, which still exists today, uses a content rating similar to the MPA, formerly known as the MPAA, which assigns ratings to theatrical movies. Despite the self-regulation, the controversies continued. There was the 1998 release of Grand Theft Auto, which set the precedent for every GTA that would come afterwards to anger parents who didn't want their children doing things like killing prostitutes, stealing cars, shooting at the police. Which, you know, seems ridiculous to me. You don't know what your child is. You don't know what they're going to be one day. You don't know what skills they're going to need to have. Just let them figure out their own path. But things took an especially dark turn in 1999 when two seniors at Columbine High School, I swear this is going somewhere, at Columbine High School in Colorado opened fire on classmates, killing 12 people, injuring 23 others, and perhaps spawning a new, continuing wave of similar violent incidents around the United States for decades to come. As authorities investigated the shooter's background, they found, among other things, that the teens had created several custom levels in Doom and Duke Nukem meant to mimic the layout of their school. This poured kerosene on the already hot subject of video game violence across the country, with some people discussing outright bans of such games. Several of the Columbine victims' families filed a federal lawsuit against 25 different media companies, including game developers, for their role in the death of the victims. While the suit was dismissed years later, the conversations continued. And as technology continues to advance, a lot of people wonder if the rise in graphics and alternate reality or VR games may contribute in a higher level of violence as people play violent games in these settings. And with that setting in mind, we of course go to Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. The first Modern Warfare title was developed by Infinity Ward and published by Activision, and was released in 2007 for Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, and the PC. Modern Warfare was a notable departure from the franchise's usual World War II setting. The game was a breakout success, winning multiple Game of the Year awards and selling 7 million copies in the first 3 months alone. And most importantly, of course, it was really cool. But Modern Warfare certainly has had a role to play in the conversation of video game violence, probably due to its size and presence. One of the first levels of Modern Warfare 1, the coup, specifically level 3, the same level that takes the player through the opening credits, is a largely cinematic experience in which the player controls the president of Saudi Arabia, who is captured by opposing forces during a coup. In the level, you watch through the president's POV as his supporters are executed by opposition forces in the middle of the street. At the very end of this level, you, the player, playing as President al-Fulani, is executed on international television by these forces. Now, I would argue that this highly impactful moment was important for the story and the development of video games as a genre, and impactful to a lot of young people when it comes to like how violence can be used as an effective medium in storytelling. But parents didn't care about that. They just cared because, you know, gross. That wasn't even the only controversial thing in the first Modern Warfare. I remember the nuke segment in Shock and Awe and Aftermath getting a ton of heat. I think I even remember people getting upset about the mission where Captain Price goes to shoot Zakhaev back in Chernobyl, all gillied up, because it was like the use of assassination, or like the fact that they were going to assassinate instead of being in an open conflict, that made people mad. It's so interesting because like old World War II games never got this criticism, but as soon as you bring it into the modern age and the characters you're playing as start using guns that the people on the news have, everyone gets afraid. It's like when it's old, when it's World War II, they're able to disconnect in their mind warfare then and warfare now, but as soon as what they're looking at in the video game looks like the same thing they look at on the news, it's hands off. Call of Duty kept up this trend. 1 year later, in Call of Duty World at War, there's a sequence where the player has to shoot a group of unarmed enemy soldiers to complete an objective. Or at least that's how most people saw it. It's during the mission Eviction. I'm pretty sure if you just walk up to them, the other Russians will kill them. Alternatively, you can light them on fire. However, after World at War, Infinity Ward was back at the helm, ready to make Modern Warfare 2, and it seemed that playing as the president of Saudi Arabia and being executed on international television wasn't enough for them, so they of course had to do the most controversial thing Call of Duty has ever been a part of. You know it, No Russian. No Russian takes place in a fictional airport in Moscow, Russia, the airport itself being named the Zakhaev International Airport based on the villain from the first game, where the player, an undercover CIA agent, helps several Russian gunmen massacre dozens of civilians at the airport. The attack is meant to appear as if carried out by Americans, so as the level begins and the player character rides up an elevator with the other gunmen, the game's antagonist, Vladimir Makarov, says, "Remember, no Russian," a step in executing a false flag on the United States. The elevator doors open and the Russians step out, opening fire on innocent civilians. Using machine guns, rifles, and grenades, people run, hide, and scream. It all feels very real, and although a small handful of security and police fire back, they're no match for your powerful weaponry. It's a massacre. All the while, some people cower in corners, others try to drag their wounded friends to safety, only to be met by a hell of gunfire. As the player, you wield a light machine gun and are encouraged to, quote, follow Makarov's lead, but otherwise are given no other instruction. After going through the terminal and slaughtering a countless number of innocents, the crew makes it to an ambulance at the loading docks at the far end of the airport. Before the van can take off, however, Makarov shoots you in the chest, revealing that he knew you were an undercover American the whole time. Your dead body will further fuel the notion that the United States was indeed behind this attack, playing right into the villain's hand and launching the world into World War III. Now, in my Modern Warfare retrospective, I talk about how I think this level is very important. It does justice to a touchy subject. It is a powerful motivator for the rest of the events of the trilogy. But to parents who were afraid of their kid getting access to a game that contained blood or words like damn and associated video games with events like Columbine, this might as well have been the Antichrist. Something you may not know is that while the level's content might have caused controversy, even if it had been revealed at launch, the issue was further exacerbated by the fact that gameplay video of only this level leaked onto several sites ahead of time, including on YouTube and a user-submitted section of CNN's website. So people saw No Russian before Modern Warfare 2 even came out. This stirred conversation and speculation on the level, and the game as a whole. A full month before the game's official release, with most gaming publications running stories on the footage and many traditional news outlets covering it as well. I have distinct memories of thinking it was really cool to see Call of Duty on the news stations my dad watched, only to immediately get berated about how violent and awful Call of Duty is. That's what I get for being happy. Now, to the best of my knowledge, no person or individual was ever identified as the leak. And while it would have been a very risky decision on the part of Infinity Ward and or Activision, if the level was intentionally leaked, well, it worked. I mean, the national conversation absolutely exploded over the controversy, giving the game several weeks worth of free press and cementing the franchise's status as one of, if not the, most culturally relevant titles of the 2000s. Ask a random guy on the street to name 5 video games, Call of Duty is going to be one of them. And I guarantee you it wasn't that way before 2009. If they did leak it, I mean, it would make sense. Other than the free press, I'm sure a lot of people who weren't familiar with the series wanted to buy the game just to see what the context of that level could possibly be. Especially since Call of Duty at the time was exclusively associated as a military game. Within hours of the leak, Activision confirmed that the footage was in fact legit, adding credibility to the theories that they allowed the leak in the first place. Hey, Activision, we saw the leak and we just wanted to know if the airport terrorist attack is legit. Yes. Oh, okay. Is there anything else you want to tell us about? Goodbye. But would a publisher ever do something like that? Well, it's certainly possible. I mean, for example, I mentioned Grand Theft Auto earlier, and as far as mainstream games go, it's probably the most controversial of all time. And it sits at the top of numerous record books in every category. The fact that Activision had a response ready to go, ran a ton of trailers that played a lot of No Russian footage, and benefited immensely from the publicity makes it seem possible. Now, what were some of the controversies that No Russian brought about? Well, if you want to know what the agencies that pay for and cover forever wars do when you start to imply that innocent people may get caught up in those wars on occasion, to give a short list, The Mirror accused the game of making light of terrorist atrocities, which I would argue it was doing the opposite, but whatever. And if you think it was bad in a media sense, it was even worse internally. The internal development team seemed to be just as, if not more, divided on the inclusion of No Russian. The level polarized the studio, with the team split on their feelings regarding how far was too far. Some wanted the player to play as a police officer attempting to stop the carnage, and Mohammed Alavi, the level's primary designer, said that initially the player was supposed to take out Makarov and the other gunmen before engaging in a firefight with armed soldiers in the airport. But according to Alavi, this made the level feel just like a typical Call of Duty mission, cheapening the message and making the whole thing feel gimmicky. I mean, if you're going to make a level that deals with something as serious as a terrorist attack, then it's a little disingenuous to have your player character swoop in and save the day. Then you're not making a story about a terrorist attack, you're making it about a hero fantasy that uses a terrorist attack as a set piece. It's also just kind of cool from a Call of Duty storyline perspective that the biggest villain or most remembered villain from the franchise, Makarov, was originally intended to die here, but because of how they rewrote the level, he continued to be an antagonist through the rest of the game and into Modern Warfare 3. And I'm sure their idea to have the player stop Makarov in this mission was very early on in development before they built out Makarov's character too much. But regardless, it's interesting that the level that introduced players to Makarov and established his evil throughout the rest of the franchise was also the level that the rewriting of it coincidentally allowed him to exist in the first place, at least as we know him. To make the level truly impactful, the developers had to innovate in how they built it out, taking a different approach than they would for a typical mission. For the NPCs, the devs needed to motion capture specific movements, including the civilians hiding and running in fear. Many of the motion cap and voiceover actors actually broke down in tears while recording their lines. And there was also the brutal decision to limit the player's movement speed to that of a slow walk. As I'm sure many of you who played the game remember, at least in the first segment where you're actually walking through the airport, sprinting in No Russian is disabled, forcing the player to follow the terrorist at an agonizingly steady pace while the massacre unfolds. And since the dev team abandoned their initial plans to make the massacre merely part of a standard mission and instead leaned into the concept, making the carnage take place across the entire length of the airport, that slow pace is even more painful than it otherwise could have been. Even individually, some of the developers were conflicted, going back and forth on how to handle the mission. Artly Joel Emsley initially pulled back on the amount of blood coming from the civilians, until his wife called out the decision, telling him it was a cop-out. Now that right there, that is a good woman. And not just to say, haha, more blood. Like I said, if you are making something that relates to real-world tragedies, don't pull your punches. If you have something to say it, because any amount that you do to lessen the impact of it lessens the statement you're making about real-world violence. And you can even lessen it to a degree, like if they made the hero come in and save the day and everyone who died was just like pixels on a screen rather than something that felt like tangible pain, then you're making a joke out of something that matters. When it came time to QA test the game, multiple industry veterans who were brought in to play test the game simply refused to even play No Russian. When presented with the level, they reportedly put down the controller on the table and walked out of the room. Developer estimates stated that about half of their QA testers chose not to fire a single shot during the level. Okay, I was gonna make a joke about how goofy it is for the initial QA testers to like pause the game and set down the controller because they refuse to play. But realistically, do you see how cool of a dynamic they've created? They have made a level so divisive that you have some people probably who play it normally, you have some people who walk through but refuse to participate, only witness, and you have some that won't even bear witness. All in a fictionalized event that you've put in a Call of Duty game. If you ever have a reaction that varied to something you make, you are on the right path. I think now, especially with video games, we're so kind of calloused to pretty much anything you could put into a game. But at the time when there was still conversation about controversies and games being too violent, There's this window of opportunity where you could do something special with it. You could tell engaging stories that went there, that went too far in some cases. And Call of Duty certainly did that. And despite, again, where the series has gone now, I think it certainly earned its place for a while. There's a reason that Modern Warfare was as beloved as it is. In regions outside the US and the UK, various bans and modifications were made to the game as a result of the level. In Russia, for example, Modern Warfare itself was supposedly facing a partial ban, but Activision removed the level entirely to avoid further issue. Which I guess in that game, if you don't even have access to know Russian, it's just like, we've got to go get Makarov, and then the next level stops, and it's like, Makarov has killed hundreds, and you're like, what? In Germany and Japan, to comply with local censorship laws and regulations, the player wasn't allowed to shoot civilians or the game would end. And despite how horrifying and tragic No Russian was for some, the devs did seem to do their due diligence to reduce the amount of harm that came from it. First of all, players could opt out of the mission entirely, with a content warning at the start of the level that informed them that they could skip the mission at any time without penalty. There's also the option to skip the mission immediately before starting it, which I also can't explain to you how insane that was to play like a mainstream video game for the first time, and a menu comes up that says what you are about to see is incredibly graphic, disturbing, do you want to skip? I feel like a lot of games, even Call of Duty, have recycled that afterwards to lesser effect, but man, did it hit the first time you saw it. And aside from the objective to follow Makarov's lead, at no point were players instructed to do anything, let alone shoot civilians, even in the game markets where this was allowed. You could complete the mission without firing a single shot and without killing anyone. Granted, the end of the mission where the police are attacking would be more difficult to do unless you shot them. But if you just threw flashbangs and ran down the right side, you'd probably be fine. And also to make sure that no one lost out on the game other than story elements if they didn't want to play No Russian, there were no trophies or achievements associated with the level. Which brings up a couple points. What would you call the achievement for beating that level? What would you call the achievement for beating it on Veteran? Call of Duty always has cutesy names for their achievements. Why not this one? Also, could you imagine if they did put an achievement there and you were some kid who, like, their mom said don't play the airport mission, and you like get achievements through the whole game, but there's just that locked one staring at you, laughing. Now, a lot of what made No Russian so controversial was the general perception of video games at the time. Although plenty of games already contain deep, meaningful story arcs and mature themes, the general public largely considered them to be something for children, or at best, mindless entertainment. Most people at the time wouldn't have thought twice about a film or TV show depicting a terrorist attack on civilians, but partly due to the perception of what a video game should be, such a depiction was considered by many to be out of bounds. To them, Call of Duty wasn't the right place for thought-provoking points of view or challenging narratives. But in an interesting turn of events, it was actually this very controversy that forced the non-gaming public to start seeing games as more than just a pastime for children. The conversation about what games are and what they're supposed to be finally recognized that, as a medium for entertainment, games were on the same level as traditional media like film and television. And to clarify, I'm not saying that Modern Warfare 2 was the first game to be mature or anything, but to a lot of adults who had no interest in video games up until then, this was the first thing they saw to make them think of video games as something more than just Mario or Donkey Kong. No longer were games just a mind-numbing way for teenagers to pass the time, they now had the potential to serve as a true art form, where narratives had the ability to change players' perceptions on real-world issues, immersing you in the perspective of somebody else unlike any other form of entertainment. Because of this, many call No Russian a watershed moment for games, or at least the public perception of them. Now, given their success with telling stories and shaping narratives, it shouldn't surprise anyone that the rise of video games has also garnered the attention of good old Uncle Sam, aside from, wanting to ban things. After all, the United States government is no stranger to using entertainment media to influence the masses. Over the decades, they have worked hand in hand with Hollywood, placing ads on television and collaborating with movie studios to craft messaging that fits their recruiting objectives, tactical pursuits, and much more. Which explains why three-letter agencies like the DoD and America's military would have great interest in using games to reach the masses and spread their messaging. After all, gaming revenue dwarfs that of the film industry. It's not even close. In 2022, for example, the theatrical box office brought in $26 billion across all films. That's pretty huge, right? In 1 year, one industry brought in $26 billion, right? That same year, 2022, the video game industry brought in $189 billion. Or in other words, over 7 times the amount of revenue that all of film brought in. And sure, while that number doesn't factor into home video and merchandising for these films, you can see why the US military-industrial complex has been so eager to use the massive reach of the gaming industry for its purposes. I mean, if we know the military and government are as involved with movies as they are, why would they not be involved in an industry that is 7 times that of movies? But is there any credibility to the idea of video games and the government or Department of Defense working together? Well, in the mid-90s, the United States Marine Corps modified a copy of Doom 2, which they called Marine Doom, to use as a training simulator. Simulator replaced the original assets and environments from the game in order to reflect more realistic wartime scenarios, and was meant to enhance the tactical decision-making and coordination amongst fire teams in the field. By 2002, the US Army had developed a war game sim literally called America's Army, which was available on Windows, Mac OS, Xbox, PlayStation, and would even become available on Android and iOS as a mobile game. The purpose of America's Army was twofold. The first was to give active military members basic training in weapons, tactical mission simulation, and team coordination, as well as situational awareness and decision-making. The second was to use the game as a recruitment tool and to build favorable PR with the general public. New and prospective recruits could also play the game before they enlisted, bridging the gap between civilian life and life in the Army. Then there was Full Spectrum Warrior, released in 2004. The game was originally intended solely for training purposes, but was later adapted for a commercial audience. As with America's Army, Full Spectrum Warrior doubled as a PR effort for the US military to gain favor with Americans and was considered a commercial success, selling over 1 million units across console and PC in just 2 years. It was positively reviewed and even received the Interactive Achievement Award for Innovation. So we know that in the early 2000s, the government was making video games for the purpose of training and straight up enlistment propaganda. So I'm sure after those were wildly successful, they just decided to quit doing it, right? They definitely didn't pour their funding into industries that were already doing it in order to accomplish the same thing only secretly, right? Perhaps what's most interesting about Full Spectrum Warrior is that it was co-produced by something called the USC Institute for Creative Technologies. But what was perhaps the most interesting about Full Spectrum Warrior is that it was co-produced by something called the USC Institute for Creative Technologies at the University of Southern California. Established in 1999, the ICT is a research center funded by the U.S. Army to develop VR, computer-based graphics, and artificial intelligence specifically to train and educate military personnel. So we have the company that is funded by the government, and that company makes video games that go to help the government and encourage support and enlistment in the government. But the relationship between the military and games doesn't end there. The use of Xbox controllers, for example, is fairly prevalent throughout the American military and its allies. The Navy has been using these controllers to work critical parts of its submarines for years, and soldiers in the Army have been photographed with the controllers strapped to their bodies, amongst a bundle of tactical gear, as they operate unmanned ground vehicles and even drones. And this isn't likely a coincidence, given how familiar a large portion of the service members should be with these controllers. In a sense, they've been training for this all their lives. That one I think is pretty cool, and it seems intuitive. I've been playing on video games my entire life, so it would be nice if I was doing a job that was literally life or death and needed a controller, they would give me the same controller that I've been using for decades. But for this video, what is the connection between the military, the government, and Call of Duty? Well, when it comes to COD specifically, there are multiple direct connections between the franchise and the US military. I also want to clarify, I'm using military here kind of flippantly. Sometimes it's the Army, sometimes it's the Department of Defense. I'm just using military as a catch-all. Activision Blizzard and Treyarch have worked closely with the Pentagon, DoD, and various branches of the military over the years. Here's some examples. The Marine Corps is listed as collaborators for Call of Duty World at War. Dave Anthony, a writer and producer on Call of Duty, was recruited by a former Pentagon official and former DoD appointee to advise a think tank in Washington on the future of war. He's on record saying that Treyarch worked closely with military advisors for installments in the franchise to ensure that the props and details were based in truth, and consulted with a lieutenant colonel on the story for Black Ops 2. He also worked with members of SEAL Team 6 and a Russian Spetsnaz soldier who wore mocap suits and contributed to lines of dialogue. In 2020, the Army sponsored Activision Blizzard's competitive Call of Duty Esports League. Which that one is hilarious to me, the idea of the Army paying for a Call of Duty esports league. Because what is the Army if not super high stakes Call of Duty esports? And the year before, in 2019, the Army sponsored and assembled an esports team comprised of 30 active duty service members out of 7,000 who tried out to boost recruitment numbers after the Army missed its recruiting goal for the first time in 12 years. Kids aren't willing to enlist and invade Syria? Start a new FaZe clan. It's also funny to imagine someone enlisting and then working really hard to be at the top of their team, and then they're like, all right, where are you sending me? And their commands like, Rust, 1v1, snipers only, no hard scope. Good luck out there, soldier. So, is Call of Duty a government psyop? Well, Call of Duty has between 90 and 100 million active monthly users worldwide, so it would stand to reason that the DoD would have the same interest in using this audience to train and recruit new enlistees as it has in other forms of media, as well as raise the public profile of the American military both at home and abroad. I think if you can make a case that movies and TV shows serve that purpose, then so do games. But when it comes to Call of Duty specifically, there have been several missions with real-world parallels throughout the game's history. Even in the recently released Modern Warfare 2, the very first mission bears striking similarities to the real-life assassination of Qasem Soleimani, an Iranian military officer killed by the US in 2020. The Iranian general, who the player is assigned to kill in the game, even looks like Soleimani. Not to mention that the Modern Warfare remakes absolutely love paralleling real-world events. Missions like Clean House are an example of no-knock raids. There are several missions where the set piece is a terrorist attack on public populations. And not to mention that one of the main antagonists is the US military, or at least General Shepard's involvement with it. And also, Shadow Company, but they're PMCs that do work closely with the US military. And it wouldn't be the first time that government agencies used video games in the course of their work either. Documents released by Edward Snowden revealed that the DoD, FBI, and CIA would monitor conversations and transactions of players, collected user data, chat logs, and other forms of communication in games like World of Warcraft and Second Life, believing terrorists could use these games to plan attacks. But that's more NSA spying than it is actually worrying about video game content itself. For one, all the stuff about Call of Duty using real-world military leaders and like real Spetsnaz soldiers in order to get the tactics right for the game, I think all that's cool. I think that's just creators and artists doing their due diligence to make sure they're doing something right. And especially with the OG Modern Warfare trilogy, it really pays off. And yes, while the military assists in several aspects of the video game being made, it seems that most of this is just so the equipment that's used and the tactics that are used are accurate in order to not give a skewed representation of the military. Which I kind of have mixed feelings on, because on the one hand, yes, that could open the door to corruption, or perhaps the government trying to get their word in edgewise, trying to subtly get stuff into the game in order to, drive favor for the military or whatever. But on the other hand, if you look at games they've assisted with, like Modern Warfare 2, that game has the main bad guy at the end as an American general. An American general, mind you, that betrayed you and is viewed as a hero to the United States. So if potentially the military has their hand in game developers' pockets in order to get their favor across, then I don't know what the game devs could possibly be doing that the military's not already letting them do. I mean, if they're just there to make sure that everything is accurate and it all looks up to snuff, then I think that's a good thing. And if things like General Shepard being the traitor and the bad guy of the game and no Russian getting through just fine are what the military censored, then what on earth were the original scripts? In conclusion, there's no doubt that video games have had a tremendous impact on individual lives and our culture as a whole, and Call of Duty specifically has played a huge part in that. The games make so much money, and in turn, the people who make and market those games dump an equally shocking amount back into them. Like anything else, the US government and military are all too happy to harness that size and that power to win psychological wars, even in our own backyards, or bedrooms, or couch, wherever you put up your Xbox. So is it a psyop? Potentially, probably. Do I care? Not really. If the PSYOP's objective is to make the military look good and something I want to enlist in, then they've done a really bad job at that. But if it's just to make the gunfights look cool and teach me about the weapons and the soldiers involved, then they win, I guess. At the end of the day, I just want to drink a Code Red Mountain Dew, make my dad buy the 6-pack at the store so I have 3 hours of 30 minutes of double XP lined up, and once again be happy and forget about my own approaching mortality. These are just a few of the things about Call of Duty that I think people forget about far too frequently. The games were impactful for a reason. They were so important then that it's one of the main reasons they're still talked about now. And if you never got to play them in their heyday and experience the good old days of Call of Duty like I did, then maybe you understand at least a little bit more what this was about. And if you're like me and just wanted to click on this video to hear about the good old times before you knew you were dying, then you're welcome. Of course, the most important thing is that you're here, and we appreciate it, and we just want to say thank you for watching. Main channel video over the original trilogy is out by now, and the next trilogy, assuming that you all didn't hate that one, I'm recording this video before I post that first one over on the main, so if you all set the channel on fire and decided to kill me because of it, then I guess the second trilogy video won't be coming out, but hopefully that doesn't happen and I'm still posting it. So the first one's out. Stay tuned for the next one. Other content on Wendigoon that's not related to video games coming on the way weekly. Thank you all so much for supporting the weekly uploads. It means a lot, and we're certainly happy to make them. Stay tuned here for more weekly uploads, and head over to Wendigoon for the continuation of this Call of Duty mental crisis that I'm in. Credits to everyone will be in the description, and that should do it for now, but we just want to say thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye! Also, if anyone still has one of those double XP codes or the bottles, so I can like frame it somewhere and pretend like I'm 12, send it to me, please. Thank you. Bye.